Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we make sense of corporate filings so you don't have to. Today we're diving into a proxy statement from Solid Biosciences, and let me tell you, there are some interesting proposals on the table, including one amendment that might dilute your shares more than a cheap glass of juice. We'll break it all down in simple terms, so stick around. First up, this document is about Solid Biosciences asking its stockholders for permission on a few key issues to be voted on at their upcoming annual meeting. These votes will decide everything from who sits on the board to some pretty significant changes in their stock structure. Let's start with the basics. A proxy statement is something companies send out to their shareholders before a big meeting. It tells you what's on the agenda and gives you a chance to vote, even if you can't make it to the meeting. One of the main things to vote on is who gets to be on the board of directors. In this case, two people, Alexander Kumbo and Sukumar Nagendran, are up for election. The board is recommending that you vote for them. Think of the board as the company's oversight team. Their job is to make sure things are running smoothly. Next up is ratifying the appointment of PricewaterhouseCoopers LP as the company's independent auditor. This is like getting a second opinion on your finances. The auditors check Solid Biosciences' books to make sure everything is accurate. Again, the board suggests voting A for this. It's generally a routine approval, but an important one. Here's where things get interesting. Solid Biosciences wants to increase the number of shares they're allowed to issue from 120 million to 240 million. That's double the amount. The board says this gives them more flexibility for things like raising money or making acquisitions, but increasing the number of shares can also dilute the value of existing shares, meaning each share is worth a little less, kind of like cutting a pizza into more slices. Then there's a vote to approve changes to their employee stock plan. They want to add 9 million more shares to it and tweak a rule called the evergreen provision. This evergreen provision automatically increases the number of shares available each year, but they want to change how that increase is calculated. This is important because it affects how much of the company employees can own, and too much dilution can hurt existing shareholders. Finally, there's an advisory vote on executive compensation. This is a chance for shareholders to say whether they think the top executives are being paid fairly. It's non-binding, so the board doesn't have to listen, but it's a good way to make your voice heard. Alright, so what happens if you don't vote? If you hold shares directly and you don't vote, your shares will not be counted. If your shares are held through a broker, they can vote your shares on some issues but not on others. The election of directors and the vote on executive compensation are usually items where your broker cannot vote without your instructions, leading to what are called broker non-votes. Now, who are the people making these recommendations? It's good to know if they are truly independent. The board says that all members except for the CEO, Alexander Kumbo, and Ilan Ganao are independent. That means they don't have relationships that could cloud their judgment. It's also worth knowing that the board oversees risk management for things like finances, legal compliance, and cybersecurity. The audit committee specifically handles those risks. How are the directors paid? They get a cash retainer for being on the board and extra for being on committees. They also get stock options. For example, a board member gets $40,000 a year just for being on the board. The chairman gets an extra $35,000 a year just for being on the board. Let's peek at a table that shows how much each non-employee director got paid in 2024. Ian Smith, as executive chairman, made around $449,000, while most other directors earned around $225,000 to $285,000 to $285,000 to $225,000, mainly from fees and stock option awards. Here's a report from the audit committee of the board about its work of reviewing the financials from management and auditors. Time to introduce the executive team. Besides CEO Alexander Kumbo, we have Gabriel Brooks as Chief Medical Officer and David Houghton as Chief Operating Officer. It's important to know who these key decision makers are. Now let's talk executive pay. This table is where we see how much the top dogs made. For example, Alexander Kumbo, the CEO, made almost $49 million in 2024. Gabriel Brooks, the Chief Medical Officer, made about $2 million, and David Houghton, the Chief Operating Officer, made around $2 million. And David Houghton, the Chief Operating Officer, made around $2.6 million. A large portion of the CEO's payment was from stock awards. Diving deeper, we see that each executive is eligible for a specific amount of bonus. For example, Kumbo is eligible for 60% of his base salary. These agreements also have clauses for what happens if they leave the company, especially if there's a change in control. In the last few years, the compensation increased. So what does that mean to shareholder returns? Let's see what happened if you invested 100 in Solid Biosciences in 2024. The final value of the 122, the final value of the 122, the final value of the 22-24 SAC. You would have a better ROI in the first 2 years and a negative return the last year. Switching gears, Solid Biosciences does offer a 400 and plan where they match 60% of employee contributions up to 6% of their salary. That's a nice benefit. Who owns the company? Perceptive Life Sciences is the biggest shareholder with over 15% of the stock. Entities affiliated with Bain Capital, RA Capital, and Invis Public Equities follow after that. Knowing who the major shareholders are gives you a sense of who has the most influence. To keep things fair, Solid Biosciences has a policy for reviewing any transactions where a board member or major shareholder has a personal interest. This helps prevent conflicts of interest. Alain Gannot, a former CEO and current board member, received payments as part of a transition agreement. His wife, Annie Gannot, also works at the company as Vice President of Patient Advocacy. Related party transactions like these require careful scrutiny. Back to the proposals, the board is recommending we increase stock amount. Now let's look at the potential implications that it has. One last thing to note is the report had an oversight where one of the forms was filed late. While it might sound like a minor thing, this kind of issue highlights areas where they need to improve to give more investor confidence. So what's the overall take? Assessing the company's direction, there are strengths and weaknesses to consider. The potential to devalue of your shares is a big thing to consider. The company's leadership thinks additional shares can facilitate financings, acquisitions, and incentivizing employees and strategic investments. However, the availability of additional shares for issuance may also have the effect of discouraging a merger or takeover bid, as the issuance of shares has a dilutive effect on earnings per share and on stockholders' equity and voting rights. Thanks for watching. Now you're equipped with the knowledge to make an informed decision on how to vote your proxy. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more corporate deep dives.